Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from today. And welcome to this Mechalux webinar held in collaboration with the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. I'm your host, Alejandro Gonzalez, Software Director at Mechalux. And today we'll be diving into the findings of a new study from the MIT Intelligent Logistics Systems Lab and Mechalux titled The State of AI in Warehousing. This is a global report and is the result of our collaboration with the MIT and brings together extensive and very insightful input from supply chain professionals around the world. So to walk us through the findings, I'm delighted to be joined by the author of the study, Matthias Winkenbach, Director of the Intelligent Logistics Systems Lab at the MIT CTL. So Matthias, welcome. The stage is yours.
Excited to talk about this report. I mean, as you mentioned, this study is a global report. It's one of the most comprehensive looks that we've taken so far on how AI is transforming the warehouse landscape, the warehouse operations landscape. And for that, we surveyed over several months, more than 2,000 supply chain professionals from 21 countries. And I think the interesting part about this report is that we didn't just look at kind of static things like adoption rates or the like. We really looked into what are the drivers, what are the motivations, what are the challenges, but also what are the workforce impacts that come from the adoption of AI. So in simple terms, if we wanted to summarize this report in one statement at the very beginning, we see that AI in warehousing is no longer just a dream. It's no longer something that people are preparing for. It's actually already here. People are living it pretty much every day.
Thank you for your introduction, Matthias. According to the report, one of the first points that caught my attention is the fact that now AI is embedded in 6 out of 10 warehouses, which sounds like a very solid proportion. So could you explain us what's driving this rapid adoption?
Sure. So there are obviously multiple drivers at play. I think one driver is that AI adoption has simply accelerated because warehouses over the last few years have become much more complex. So if we look at our findings, we see that about 9 in 10 warehouses already operate somewhere beyond basic automation. Actually, the vast majority of the respondents described their own warehouse operations as highly automated. And that means that people are embracing AI and machine learning not because it's necessarily a hype or anything, but because the complexity of their operational environment actually demands it. They have more SKUs to handle, they have higher throughputs, they have increasingly challenging customer expectations. So there's overall more variability than ever before. And machine learning and AI tools can be the way to cope with that variability and that complexity. So that's one driver, complexity. The other driver that we see is actual capability growth within the companies that we surveyed. So most of these companies report that they have improved the technical skills of their workforce, that they have improved their own data management practices, because obviously ML and AI can only work if you have good data. And then also a lot of companies report that they invested into having IT systems that allow them to better integrate ML and AI solutions. So we see kind of a momentum loop forming here where as AI becomes a little bit easier to deploy, as people become more comfortable with this technology, they're also seeing more value coming from AI as a technology in warehousing, and that then obviously leads to higher investments. So this is kind of a self-reinforcing cycle. So in a nutshell, companies are investing into AI because their operations are more complex, because their internal capabilities are becoming stronger, and quite frankly, because it's a necessity to stay on the forefront of AI and machine learning just to stay competitive and to maintain performance.
Okay, and in line with this rapid adoption of AI, the report also shows that the wide majority of companies, more or less 83% of them, they have increased their use of AI last year. So where is that artificial intelligence actually being used inside the warehouses, and more precisely, which operations are seeing the biggest boost?
So when people think about AI, they obviously very often think about fancy futuristic solutions, futuristic technologies, or they think of how they are currently using AI in like chatbots like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini. But what we see in our report is that on an industrial level, AI is actually being applied to the very core of warehousing activity. So really to things that matter in day-to-day operations. So for example, we see that companies predominantly use machine learning and AI in tasks that, for instance, require them to optimize inventory or to make better picking decisions or to think about the routing of flows or vehicles or equipment or people within a facility. Or when it comes to demand forecasting, basically demand forecast accuracy is a key driver for why people are exploring machine learning methods these days. Or predictive maintenance is another one where it's not just something that people talk about, this actually happens on the shop floor today. And there are obviously somewhat more futuristic applications too, like for instance, quality inspection through computer vision. This is not something that only the technology leaders of this world can do today. It's actually something that is available to many companies out there to integrate into their warehouse operations. So basically, we see that AI is not just being used for some peripheral task as basically a little pilot study to see whether it works or not. It's actually supporting a significant portion of the operations of the companies that we surveyed. What we do see, however, is that the effectiveness of AI integration rises sharply in the level of advanced automation that a company actually processes. So once a warehouse has pretty solid IT systems, has decent data, then obviously AI performs more reliably and can deliver more measurable impact faster. So in short, AI is no longer just being used at the edges of the warehouse, it's actually powering the core processes that determine accuracy, speed, productivity, and therefore create commercial value.
Interesting. And moving on to the second theme of this study, which focuses mainly on investment and return on investment, I wanted to ask you how companies are allocating their budgets for AI and machine learning, and also what kind of returns they are seeing so far, if this is, possible to know.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really, let's say, find specific, let's say, return quantities in terms of what's the ROI on your projects. That's very hard to measure at this stage too. But what we do see is that the investment levels that the companies that responded to our service report, that investment level tells us a lot about the maturity of AI. So what we, for instance, see is that most companies, it's around 75%, so 3/4 of our respondents already today dedicate somewhere between 11 and 30% of their overall warehouse technology budget specifically to AI and machine learning initiatives. So that's a pretty sizable share. It's no longer just a small little budget for basically exploratory research. This is actually showing that AI is part of mainstream planning for warehouse technology. And that's important to note because it means that the adoption of AI is much more mature than it used to be a couple of years ago in the warehousing space. And then the other important thing is obviously how long does it actually take us to see returns on these investments? And most of the companies that we surveyed report a payback period of 2 to 3 years. Some of them are seeing returns even sooner, but generally speaking, these timeframes align with what you would typically see in technology investment cycles. So AI is now actually a financially sound investment vehicles, financially sound area of investment that is grounded in operational value that it creates. So the value that it creates, the companies that we talk to track that based on, for instance, improvements in inventory accuracy or increased throughput or higher labor efficiency, reduction of errors. So all of these things that basically immediately lead to reduced cost or improved service and therefore value. So in a nutshell, the organizations that we surveyed are investing real money in AI, so not just change. It's a significant share of their technology budgets. We see that they are seeing measurable returns from the areas that I just mentioned, and they are doing so in relatively predictable business cycles. So it's not a bet on this is going to show a positive ROI in, let's say, 10 years from now, but within timeframes that you would usually see in major technology investments in this space.
Fair enough. It's also pretty impressive to see, that around 3/4 of the companies are dedicating, I think, a significant amount of their warehouse technology budgets in AI and machine learning. And it's also interesting to see how, in a relatively short period of time, AI investments are moving from just simple and small pilot projects to really projects where proven returns are being delivered, right? So, Matthias, looking ahead, what's the future outlook for AI and machine learning in warehousing, and are organizations planning to increase their investments in the near future?
Mm-hmm. So yes, I mean, we kind of already had a sense about this before we did this study, because as a research institution, the MIT Center for Transportation obviously talks to a lot of companies about how could they use AI and machine learning in the future in their operations, whether it's warehousing or otherwise. So obviously everyone talks about machine learning and AI, and so it's not surprising that our survey results show that pretty much every organization in that survey either has an active AI project already underway or actually plans to launch a new one within the next couple of months. So basically hardly anyone told us we have no plans whatsoever related to AI and machine learning. But obviously that could just be a lip service. So people might just say, yeah, we're doing AI because that's what people expect them to say. So the much more, let's say, reliable indicator here is actually the amount of investment. And so we asked about future budgets, and about 87% of the companies that we surveyed actually told us that they expect to increase their AI investments, and many of them are going to do so quite significantly. So that's actually a stronger indicator of a relatively positive outlook on the use of AI and machine learning across a broader spectrum of warehousing applications. So this tells us we're no longer in a pilot phase, and a lot of companies that we surveyed appear to be building long-term roadmaps. So no longer just think about individual isolated pilots, but are actually looking at how can we scale AI across multiple sites in our organization, for instance. And so there is a momentum that seems to be that warehouses are becoming a more technical space and are therefore moving towards a more intelligent, more interconnected, more decision-driven space for operations. So in a nutshell, industry investment in AI is certainly not slowing down. Quite the opposite seems to be the case. Companies that we surveyed seem to be preparing to scale AI more broadly. And they're doing so with increased budgets, but also increasingly aggressive timelines.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's clear that AI investments are speeding up, and it's also clear that AI is now a hot topic in the management and C-level meetings across the board. So when it comes to taking real action and deciding to actually invest in AI, what are companies really aiming for, and more precisely, what goals are driving these decisions?
Yeah. So many people obviously think that the primary goal of AI adoption is cost reduction. And it is obviously an objective of every company that deploys a new technology. You do that usually in order to become more cost efficient. But I think right now, the highest or the most important kind of objective that companies cite is actually not immediate cost reduction, but rather working towards more efficient processes. So efficiency improvements, because they want, for instance, to be able to offer faster services, faster operations, or because they want to make more accurate decisions, or they want to have fewer bottlenecks, smoother flows, reduced variability, more flexibility to adjust to uncertainty, to basically randomness in the market. So obviously these in the end will lead to ideally reduced cost, but the primary objective really is to improve efficiency overall of warehouse operations. And then the second biggest driver that we see here in the study is innovation. So that is kind of reflecting a bit of a mindset shift, I would say, because it indicates that people no longer see AI purely as a tool that will cut costs by, I don't know, removing human workforce, but actually they see it as a tool to build new capabilities within an organization, and therefore basically as a competitive differentiator. So if you're not actually investing in this, you might lose the innovation race within your industry. And that's kind of an important perspective that comes out of our survey, because it shows that the adoption of AI is somewhat maturing. Because in the early days of AI adoption in logistics, supply chain related fields, the investments into that were predominantly defined or justified through efficiency and therefore cost. While today, many organizations are realizing that AI is actually, at least as importantly, a value play. So AI will allow you to create superior value to your customers or to other parts of your organization through better orchestration of your operations, through better forecasting, through better allocation of resources, or simply through more adaptive and flexible decision making. So rather than just cutting cost, it's actually allowing you to sell a better product or sell a better service to your customers. So companies seem to be no longer just turning AI, using AI to be leaner or more cost efficient, but actually to be smarter and to create superior value. I think that's the key message here. And that will probably shape the next wave of innovation that we will also see in warehouse AI in the near future.
That's interesting, and in line with what you were saying, no, this cost cutting aspect. I think that there is another side of this conversation that shouldn't be underestimated, and it's sometimes a bit controversial, which is the human side of things, right? As you know, many people still worry, that automation or AI will replace their jobs, and I'm really curious to see and to hear what your research shows about how AI is actually affecting workers and also their day-to-day jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that is actually one part of the study that I was also most curious about, because whenever I speak about machine learning AI applications in our domain in supply chain logistics, and we talk about robotic solutions and the like, people obviously ask questions about, okay, how is this going to affect the future of work? And the center actually has quite a few research projects on this specifically, but what this study shows is actually a predominantly encouraging message. So the data that we received from our respondents shows a overwhelmingly positive effect on the workforce. So we see that they report that productivity per worker increases for, I think, more than 3/4 of the companies that we asked this. Job satisfaction rises for a similarly large share. Interestingly, also training requirements. A lot of companies report that the training requirements that they have rise, which is actually a sign of upskilling, not necessarily displacement. So you wouldn't necessarily train a human worker if you were planning to basically make them obsolete in the near future. But we see that companies invest in their workforce to basically bring them up to the next level of skills that they need in a more kind of AI-driven world. And what surprised us the most probably was that the companies that we asked, more than half of them responded that their total workforce size actually rose due to their activities in AI and machine learning. And that kind of indicates that AI seems to be more complementing than replacing human work. So a second thing that we see is that kind of the advent of AI and machine learning in the warehousing space leads to the emergence of entirely new roles that previously you wouldn't necessarily have found in a warehouse environment. So think of AI and machine learning engineers that you actually need on the ground to make these solutions work. You need automation specialists. You need people who are experts in process improvements, or you need a good data scientist. And so, as I said before, I believe warehouses are becoming an increasingly technical work environment. And so we still need humans there, but we will allow them to focus more on oversight, interpretation, and basically interference for critical issues. So rather than basically focusing on repetitive tasks, the job descriptions of these humans will become basically elevated by the advent of AI and machine learning. And the training strategies that we talked about earlier reflect this. So companies rely on a variety of training mechanisms, from internal programs to external trainings, trainings by vendors, on-the-job learning. But all of these are intended to help workers advance their skill set and be able to actually make productive use of all the new and powerful tools that AI and machine learning brings to their fingertips. So to sum it up, I think, or our survey shows that in some, AI is certainly reshaping warehouses in a positive way when it comes to workforce effects. Obviously, some jobs may become obsolete, but in some, the aggregate effect seems to be positive. And it's elevating skills, it's expanding roles, it's increasing the satisfaction of people, which probably also has a positive effect on talent retention. So I would say it expands rather than reduces human opportunity.
Yeah, well, honestly, it's reassuring to see that, rather than reducing headcount, the AI is creating new opportunities and is also helping employees to become more productive, more satisfied at work, and obviously better trained. But moving into another theme of this study, which talks about how AI methods create value, the report shows that generative AI is now the top-ranked AI method delivering value in warehouses. Why has this Gen AI become so impactful, and why do you think that this has happened so quickly, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we do see this not just in the warehousing space, but pretty much across the entire supply chain industry, that Gen AI is obviously also the most hyped machine learning technology. There's no doubt about that. But it is also undoubtedly the most, let's say, value generating technology out there. Don't want to undermine the other technologies out there, but generative AI plays a very prominent role for a good reason, and that's because it addresses some of the biggest bottlenecks that, for instance, reside within automation projects. So Gen AI, the difference between other machine learning technologies and generative AI is that it doesn't just stop at making better predictions, for example. It actually helps people come up with better solutions. And that means for instance, an automation project, there are a lot of relatively manual, repetitive, highly standardized tasks, like, for instance, documentation processes, or even the design of warehouse layouts or mapping process flows. This follows very clearly defined rules that are also very clearly codified somewhere. Creating system configurations for a new warehouse, for example, or even writing code for the integration of software and hardware and whatnot. All of this is a relatively manual, relatively repetitive part of the process that is also basically replicable from one project to the other and takes a lot of time. So generative AI basically can dramatically accelerate these activities. I'm not saying that it's necessarily going to replace any human activity in these areas, but it's basically a really helpful tool to come up with very high quality starting points that humans can then basically take and instantly refine, and therefore basically make sure that all the solutions that the generative AI tool came up with are actually viable, don't conflict with anything, and then deploy these decisions much faster than we were previously able to do it. So simply speaking, Gen AI can shorten time to value and frees up capacity of our very well educated engineers, for example, to focus on the more complex decisions or the more critical decisions that really require human judgment and experience and are harder to automate, basically. So, in summary, the reason why Gen AI is so popular and so impactful is because it turns slow, manual design, documentation, other type of standardized tasks into fast and automated ones. And basically that allows the warehouse to adapt and improve far more quickly because, as I said, Gen AI helps you to shorten the time to value of any project.
So based on the report's findings and your experience, Matthias, my next question is going to be, what would be your top recommendations for the executives that are currently planning their next AI investments? What should they do?
I mean, it's hard to come up with just a single piece of advice, but if I had to, I would probably say, keep it simple. Don't, let's say, start by investing into some very high flying project, super high visibility, but also super high complexity. Start with the foundations. So invest in the actual foundations of successful AI and machine learning implementations. And those are maybe not as shiny, but are very important to get right in the first place. Those would be having high quality data across the organization. So consistency and quality of the data, investing in systems that capture that type of data. Generally, investing into an IT infrastructure that makes it easier to actually reliably integrate AI and machine learning technologies. For instance, if you are having 50-year-old legacy systems, those might be a bottleneck if you are planning to suddenly integrate state-of-the-art AI tools into an existing process. And last but not least, build internal capabilities. So actually upskill your internal teams because you need these people to successfully deploy technology. So our survey, for instance, shows that the biggest barriers that companies currently report to the successful adoption of AI and machine learning are things like technical expertise of their team, integration challenges, so basically making it work with other software tools, but also other hardware within the warehouse environment. And last, but certainly not least, data issues. Every company says when we do research with them, we have so much data, we have the greatest data, and very few companies actually do. So investing into high quality, consistent data is key. And then what the study also shows is that some of the biggest accelerators are better, more modular AI tools, obviously, more skilled people, and a clear implementation roadmap. So if we want to deploy an AI solution, we need to make it very visible to the organization how we are going to deploy this and when the change is going to happen. So executives who want to scale AI effectively should focus on building cross-functional teams, making sure that their data flows are consistent and high quality, and potentially modernize their IT infrastructure to facilitate integration. So success with AI depends far more on strengthening the organizational foundations than choosing, let's say, the right algorithm right now. The foundation is what makes everything else possible. Once you have that foundation right, you can worry about finding the right algorithm for a specific problem later. And the last piece of advice I would probably give is that, let's say you have those foundations in place and you want to deploy an AI solution, deploy a solution that actually generates value for a process that you very well understand. So we mentioned a few of them earlier already. Things like inventory management, slotting, resource allocation. People are doing this today with existing tools. They know roughly what a good solution should look like to these problems. So they can then also judge whether an AI solution is actually generating value or not. So don't start with the very complex high-flying ideas start with the slightly simpler deployments that have a clearer path to immediate value for the investment.
Thank you very much for your recommendations, Matthias. I'm pretty sure that there is a lot of people in our audience that will use your recommendations as part of their roadmap with the AI. There is clearly a lot happening in the world of AI nowadays, and these findings really help to clarify where the real opportunities lie. What comes through very clearly as well, I think, is that AI is no longer an experiment, but a real driver of sustainable growth, efficiency, productivity, and also profitability for companies. And as a result of all of this, there is no doubt that companies investing in AI within their supply chains, and more specifically within their warehouses today, will be the ones leading the next area of warehousing. So this was the last question that we had prepared for today's webinar. But before we wrap up, we'll now move into a short Q&A session, because we've already received several questions from the audience. So we'll try to go through as many as we can with Matthias. So the first question that we've selected, it comes from Thomas, and the question is, what kind of companies have you surveyed, and what is the average revenue of these companies, if you know, Matthias?
To be honest, I don't know the exact numbers from the top of my head, but what I can assure Thomas is that the survey covered, as I said, about 2,000 respondents from 21 countries. And we did deliberately choose respondents from a wide range of company sizes. So basically, if you, for instance, asked about how many warehouses do you actually operate, and we saw basically responses from companies that operate maybe just a handful of warehouses to companies that actually operate a global network of, I don't know, dozens of warehouse facilities. So like similarly for the revenue, I don't have the exact number right now in front of me, but we have a wide range of respondents from small to medium-sized enterprises all the way to billion-dollar companies. So it's a relatively representative set. And we obviously also made sure to cover not just one particular region. So we didn't want the study to be just focused, let's say, on Europe or on the US. We actually spanned the entire globe with our survey. So obviously scaled by the size of each country. But if you look into the report, you will also see a few interesting nuances on a geographical level, because not every country actually is exactly the same in how they've responded to our question. So don't have an exact answer for the average revenue question for you, but it is a relatively wide range of companies that we surveyed.
Fair enough. Thank you, Matthias. The next question is from Nicolas, and the question is, what is the main barrier to moving from advanced automation to AI-driven decision making? It's data integration, user trust and adoption, or organizational governance?
The academic in me wants to say it's a mix of both, all of these, I would say. So as I said before, I think that the critical enabler is really data and integration. Because except for a few kind of niche applications, a really valuable AI-based decision-making tool can only work if you have reliably solid data. And if that tool properly integrates, and that means automatically integrates into existing IT infrastructure, because the sheer, let's say, amount of data that would usually be involved is something that you cannot basically manually port from a legacy system to this new tool. It needs to work seamlessly within your existing IT infrastructure. But when you say organizational governance, I think that's hitting an interesting point, because at the end of the day, the success or failure of deployment of an AI or machine learning solution also very heavily depends on change management. So basically, if you make the people that are responsible for the job that is being augmented by AI and machine learning, if you involve them into this deployment early and create full transparency, that significantly increases your chances of a successful deployment. So if people who actually have to do the job later understand what you're actually doing, so what this AI tool is supposed to do, why you're doing it, so what the expected benefit of this will be, and also how and when it is going to happen. That is actually a critical enabler for successful deployments. And that is obviously more a managerial constraint than a technological one, but one that a lot of companies often overlook. On the pure technological side, I would say, sure, data and system integration is probably the critical foundation. As I said before, without that, it just won't work. And then you need the expertise either in-house or through partners that you work with to basically deploy the right type of algorithm, right type of technology to solve the specific problem that you're trying to solve. But that, honestly, I mean, that is obviously the technically most challenging part, but that's quote unquote easy to get right if the foundations look good, if the data is there and the integration is there.
Yeah, that's clear. So we have another question from Mark van Hunen. Well, there are actually two questions in one. The first one is, would the positions for new hires be different within companies that have implemented AI? And the second one is, if people have been working in conservative or traditional warehouses for years, who would want to apply for jobs in AI slash machine learning warehouses?
Mhm. Um, I mean, we didn't specifically ask that question to our survey respondents, but I can tell you from experience that we have from other research projects, also in other industries. A good example is, for instance, the trucking industry, where you also see that there might be semi or fully autonomous long haul trucks not too far in the future. So people ask us, so what is that going to do to the workforce that we can attract to this industry? And the interesting thing is that kind of the introduction of technology, in this case AI and machine learning, actually makes very traditionally also labor-intensive jobs more attractive to parts of the talent pool that would otherwise not consider this job. And those parts are actually at basically the two extremes, I would say, of the age spectrum. One is obviously the young crowd. So the young crowd is obviously excited about technology, and if they realize, okay, in logistics, in warehousing, in supply chain, there are actually interesting jobs for me to do that give me exposure to this type of technology that makes that type of job more attractive to them than it would have otherwise been. The other important factor is, if we are thinking about AI and machine learning, for instance, in the context of warehouse robotics solutions, for example, which are also a major area of this type of technology being deployed, this makes the job of a warehouse worker more accessible, for instance, also to older people who at some point would probably find it challenging just physically to lift things or to move things around. So where the physical demands of this job are at some point just too challenging for a certain age group, while that age group actually possesses a lot of experience that you would probably not want to lose. So we see that the deployment of AI and machine learning can actually open up or extend the attractiveness of a given industry and a traditionally very labor-intensive industry to basically an older part of the workforce, which is important in many economies because we have, especially in the Western world, a very aging population. And so in order to stay productive, we need to make sure that people who want to or have to work longer can also continue doing their job that they might have been doing for many years before. And AI and machine learning may not be the only solution to that, but it could be an important enabler. Critical for that is obviously training, so that obviously an individual warehouse worker probably doesn't need training into the inner workings of the algorithm that power an AI solution, but they need to be able to work with it productively, give it the right type of input to then also obtain the highest quality output from these tools. I hope
Thank
that
you.
answered the question.
Yeah, it really answered. The next question, and it's probably gonna be the first one the last one, sorry, that we will have today, because we're running a little bit. We have just 5 minutes left. So this question is from Rolando Estreber, and the question is related to the fact that is the AI infrastructure ready for fast adoption in the industrial sector?
Depends a bit on what you mean by AI infrastructure. I think, as I said before, and what also our survey showed, there are certain AI technologies and AI applications that are definitely ready for rapid and wide-scale industrial adoption. So we talked about automating processes like documentation or design processes and the like. From other work that we do here at the center, one very hot area of AI deployment currently is, for instance, procurement. So deciding where do I actually source a certain product or material from, in which quantity, from which supplier, and whatnot. And the associated paperwork like contracting, negotiating terms, and all of that. These are, again, very, very standardized, very repetitive tasks where current AI technology is already robust enough, scalable enough, efficient enough to deploy it at scale. Other things are obviously a little bit further or a little bit behind in the adoption curve. If you think about, for instance, the use of AI and machine learning in warehouse robotics, it's possible to do this, just that the technology to actually basically power a warehouse robot entirely based on AI is much more complex than the applications that I mentioned previously, and also requires much higher compute resources, for example, is therefore costlier to train and to deploy, and therefore something that not every company is probably ready to do at this stage. So here we will certainly see benefits from also technological advancements. So either on the hardware side, we see more and more efficient hardware to actually train these models, which is a very processing intense task. But we also see work of people like me, or the people here at the center, our students who come up with new methods that actually reduce the cost of training and deploying such models in the real world. And that will for sure happen within the next couple of years, because we've seen a very steep improvement in this area over the last few years, and there's no reason to believe that this will just suddenly stop. So as I said before, like the immediate value delivering applications like inventory management, slotting, stuff like that, sure, there are existing AI solutions that are ready for deployment. The slightly more advanced applications might be slower in their adoption, but certainly will make it to the warehouse.
Thank you, Matthias. Well, as they say, all good things come to an end. So with these final questions, we will wrap up today's webinar. So once again, Matthias, thank you very much for your time and for your valuable insights. And to our audience, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope that this session has given you some useful ideas to take back to your teams. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon. And please don't hesitate to reach out to Matthias or myself if you would like to continue the conversation around AI and warehousing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.